Okay, this video is for Monday, April 6th, Math 5, Lesson 119. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to continue on learning about our decimals. So a little bit of review from last week. If we took our little 1 unit and we zoomed it in, we can take that 1 unit and we can break it into tenths. Okay, so here's our little 1 place. And then this becomes our tenths place, just broken into tens, right? Tenths. And this is our hundredths place. And of course we take it and we break it into 100 pieces. And count how many. These also represent fractions as well. So we're going to continue on in our learning. A couple things that we want to see. If you look in the purple box on your worksheet, it talks about equivalent fractions. So let's look at this decimal. It's 4 tenths. Remember, we read the number and then we put it over its place. So it's the same thing as 4 tenths. So these two things are equal. Okay. What about this? Let's read this one. This one is actually 40 hundredths. So let's write that fraction down. Okay, and let's go ahead and reduce that fraction. Mark out the zeros. And what am I left with? 4 tenths. Okay, they mean the same thing. Now let's look at it in picture form. If I were to break this up into 10, and I colored in 4 of those, and this one, if I broke it into 100ths, and I colored in 40 of those, do you see how we've colored in the same amount? So this tells us something. Do we really need a 0 on the end of a decimal? No, we do not. 0.4 or 0 and 4 tenths is the same as 0 and 40 hundredths. It's also the same as 0 and 400 thousandths. These are all the same. When we have zeros on the end, as long as there's not, if this was here, we would not be able to get rid of that 0 if there's a number. But if it's just 0 on the end, we actually don't have to use those. They're equivalent and they're equal. Okay, so let's look at some decimals on the number line. Okay, so on your worksheet, you have 0 and 36 hundredths on one end, and you have 0 and 37 hundredths on the other end. So what is in the middle? Okay, well, if we look over here and we have this cut into hundredths, it's not a very good one. And I say, okay, well, what is 36 hundredths? Well, it's 3 tens. Let's color in all 3. And then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have 36 hundredths colored in. Well, what is 37 hundredths? Well, 37 hundredths is just 1 more. So what we're looking at is breaking this 37 hundredths up into 100 little pieces, into thousandths. Okay, so what happens in between this number and this number are the thousandths place. So we would have 0 and 361 thousandths, and then we would have 0 and 362 thousandths, and so on. 0, 363 thousandths. Okay, so you can see how this goes on until we get right here. We would have 0, 369 thousandths, because what is this one? This one is really 0 and 370 thousandths, or 37 hundredths. Okay, so when we round, it's the same concept. If I wanted to see where this one rounds to, well, I would say, well, it's actually closer to 0 and 36 hundredths. If I wanted to round this one, I would say, well, it's closer to 0 and 37 hundredths. So how would we do that without a number line? Well, when I look at this number and I say, okay, I want you to round to the hundredths place, well, I look to my neighbor. My neighbor is a 3, so it tells my number to stay the same or to go down the number line. Okay? Now, what if I had this number? I look to my neighbor. Remember, 4 tells it to stay the same, so it would round down to 0 and stay the same. Okay? But what happens when we get to a 5? I'll look to my neighbor. And the 5 always tells it to do what? To go up. So at this point, we would round up to 0 and 37 hundredths. The 6 would become a 7. Am I worried about the 3? No, the 3 remains the same. Okay, so it's the same kind of rounding that you've always done, but you need to make sure that you underline the place value that you're rounding to and look to the neighbor. And remember, 1, 2, 3, and 4 make it round down to the same number. And 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 make it round up to the next number. Okay, and that place value. All right, so let's see if there's any specific ones that I need to go over with. I think you guys can do it. Make sure in 1 through 8 you're doing equal or not equal. We're not doing less than and greater than. Okay, so don't do those. Just equal and not equal. Make sure that you're reading your directions, and if you don't understand them, feel free to Marco Polo me and get the help that you need.